Today's topic of discussion is Corporate Transparency Act. Thank you so much, ECTI, for organizing this and helping us put this together. In a very, this is like a very perfect, really perfect timing for this presentation because this new act has just gone into effect. And really in the next couple of months or so, when actually the requirement to start reporting under this act will trigger in. So this is a perfect time to learn about the requirements and sort of, have a deeper dive into it. So before we start, I will just give you like a quick overview of the outline of the presentation. So before we start, we'll do a quick refresher on the type of business entities, because that really is the foundation of all of the requirements that we are going to be discussing going forward. So we'll look at the basic forms of business entities that by and large exist. What does the CTA require of small businesses? And then we will break down all the requirements one by one. And then at the end, we'll do a quick tour of the website where the reports have to be filed. So to start with, this may be very basic. Maybe you are familiar with all the corporate structures. Maybe you're not. That's completely fine. So we are looking at sole proprietorship. So that really is the most, the simplest form of running a business. You don't have to register yourself. It's me, Shweta Chaube. I, as an individual, can run the business. I don't have to file anything with the Secretary of State. But if I want to use a different business name, a trade name for my business, then I can register that. Then moving on, LLC, Limited Liability Company. This is one of the most popular business structure that is adopted by micro and small businesses. So you may have one or more members in the company, but you do need to register this entity with the Secretary of State. Now, moving on to limited liability partnerships, you have two or more partners that decide to come together to run the business, but you don't have the full protection of limited liability company. In this case, registration with the Secretary of State is required. And then the fourth one we are looking at is corporations. So corporations are owned by shareholders, little bit different from what we see in case of LLC, where you have members and you have units. In case of corporations, we have shareholders and we have shares. And then again, you need to register the entity with the Secretary of State in order to operate the business. Now, coming to the star of the show, Corporate Transparency Act. There is a lot of buzz about it. Maybe you've heard about it, maybe you've not, but that's fine. This law was passed a couple of years ago. The Congress actually enacted the act in 2021. But over the course of last couple of years, the US Department of Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN. So FinCEN is the governing government entity that's actually responsible for collecting the reports and really implementing the rules under the CTA that all the small businesses have to comply with. So they are the ones who have developed this rule and the reporting requirement over the last couple of years. And there has been work in the background that has been happening, but the requirements went into effect on January 1, 2024. So you haven't missed out on anything. Nothing to worry, nothing to sort of stress over that, oh, there was a deadline that you have maybe missed out on. The rules are just going into effect. In fact, FinCEN has continued to provide clarification under the rules, and they just launched the actual form that has to be filed as part of the requirement under the Corporate Transparency Act. So what is the purpose of this requirement? And just to do a quick sort of like an overview, the Corporate Transparency Act, under the Corporate Transparency Act, FinCEN has come up with the requirement of pretty much all businesses in the country country, so not just Ohio, in the country, to report their beneficial ownership information with FinCEN. So that, in a nutshell, is the requirement that we have to comply with. What is the objective behind it? The objective behind is to curb money laundering, any type of illicit funds that may be coming into the country. So really, it is more for financial, to make sure that there are no bad players in the system. So that really is the motive, objective behind it. Now, what is the BOI reporting requirement under CTA? So this is the term that you're going to be hearing a lot of: Corporate Transparency Act, beneficial ownership requirement, beneficial ownership report. So these are the terms that you'll hear floating around. So we are going to break them down here one by one. And like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to send them in the chat. So under the CTA, reporting companies are required to report their beneficial ownership information to FinCEN. So FinCEN is the one that's collecting this information. Sometimes people are getting confused. Do we have to send this information to IRS? Is IRS collecting the information, or they are receiving it? No, it's the FinCEN that is in charge of this, so to say, operations. So beneficial ownership information, what does it mean? It means information about the individuals, not the company, individuals who directly or indirectly own or control a company. So the emphasis here is people who directly or indirectly own or control a company. So the devil here is in the detail, and we look at the form. Form is relatively simple, but it's just knowing who needs to comply with it, what information, whose information we need to share. These are the details that are a little bit tricky here. So,
Hey,
yeah, right.
sorry, Shweta, we have a couple questions in the chat.
Sure.
One person asked, what is the requirement for a sole proprietor?
So yes, good question. Sole proprietors are not required to file a report, because sole proprietors are not registered with the Secretary of State. So they are exempt from this requirement, and we'll come to it when we describe actually what a reporting company is. And that's where it's basically elaborated. That is, the companies that have or are required to register with the Secretary of State, they are largely the ones who have to file it. And then we look at the exempt companies as well.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, what is the definition of a beneficial ownership? In other words, what is the minimum amount or percentage of ownership?
Yeah, so we'll come to it again as we are breaking down the definitions. We'll come to it, but in short, beneficial owners are the ones who own 25% or more ownership interest in a company, or the ones who have the authority to exercise control over the company. And we'll break it down in detail in the next slides.
Perfect. And what if an owner is another company? Would that entail us the same?
So they are looking at direct or indirect ownership of a company. So if you think about it, they are not concerned with another entity that owns your LLC, but who is the ultimate owner. So if you own the owner of the entity, there is three layers. You have your LLC, and on top of that, you have the owner LLC, and that owner LLC is owned by you, then your name still has to be reported as a beneficial owner. And I do definitely want to put a disclaimer that it is more nuanced. So make sure that you look at your operating agreement, make sure that you look at your entity structure. And we'll come to that, but there are very few exceptions that apply to small businesses. So what we are looking at is literally like millions of companies will have to file this report. The exceptions are more like, large companies that are already in public domain, but for small businesses, there are very, very few exceptions.
Thank you.
right. Sure. So beneficial ownership information, as we were looking at, it basically information about the individuals who directly or indirectly control or own the company. So we are looking at individuals here, and like I said, they are not really concerned with the another business owning your business. They are more concerned with individuals who are who are running the show. Basically, that's what they're concerned with. Now, what does the report include? The report includes information about reporting company, beneficial owners. Obviously, that's what the whole dance is about, and company applicants. So we'll address each of these and we'll break down each of these one by one. All right, so what is a reporting company? So generally, a reporting company is defined as an entity that is created by filing a document with the Secretary of State or similar office in a state or Indian tribes under their respective laws. So it can be in any state, a company that had to register to operate, and that had to register with the state Secretary of State to actually run the business. So basically, that covers everybody, right? So it's sort of like everybody's covered except for people that are specifically excluded. So that really is the very broad, wide definition of a reporting company. Now, generally, this includes, but again, it's not limited to corporations, limited liability companies, limited liability partnerships, certain nonprofit entities, certain type of business trust, even foreign companies that are registered in another country, but they are have activities in the US, even they are required to file this report. Now, here I mentioned that sole props are not required to register and they are not considered a reporting company. Now, here are the companies that are exempt from filing the report. And like I said, the exception is generally you will see these are the companies that are large. They are not really considered small businesses. Large companies and the companies that are already regulated. So they are in a very, highly regulated industry. So for example, insurance, banking, brokerage, CPAs that run, or investment advisor, they are already highly regulated. So their report is not required because they are, required to do all of these licensing requirements and all that prior to even starting their business. Large domestic corporations with at least 20 employees and that have had 5 million in gross receipts. So these are the ones that have to that are exempt, and inactive entities that were inactive prior to 2020. So by inactive, it means they haven't really terminated their registration with the Secretary of State, but they have not been active in the business. So the company hasn't had any sales, company hasn't had any operations, they haven't sent or received any funds in greater than $1,000. So they are the ones who are exempt. And then there are certain exceptions, but sometimes if you have an exempt entity that owns another entity, then those ultimate subsidiaries, they may be exempt from reporting requirement. And then last but not the least, you have tax exempt entities. So it's a little bit tricky here, the way they have put forth this requirement that tax exempt entities means nonprofits, for example, nonprofits that have 501c3 status. But you have to be mindful because when you create a nonprofit, you are not immediately a 501c3 exempt entity. You have to actually apply to IRS to obtain that exemption, and that can take anywhere from like 3 to 6 months to obtain. So that's why it is possible that as soon as you create a nonprofit, you would be required to file the report, the BOI report. But once you have your exempt status, then you are basically required to just update with FinCEN and update the information that you are an exempt entity now. So this part is just a little bit tricky, and we'll specifically address to it when we talk about the timelines. Any questions in the meantime?
Yeah, there was one question. A person asked, "What is the time frame for inactive entities? Like, is it being inactive since January of 2020?"
Before that existed before uh,
Hmm.
January of 2020, but they have remained active in the last 1 year.
Okay.
Yeah. So who is the beneficial owner that must be disclosed? So we were talking about, first, we have looked at the reporting company. So we've talked about the companies that have to file this report. And now we are looking at who is a beneficial owner that must be disclosed. So I think we were just, somebody had a question about beneficial ownership. So that's what we are tackling here. So under the CTA, a beneficial owner of a reporting company is an individual who directly or indirectly either exercises substantial control over the company or owns at least 25%, owns or controls at least 25% of the ownership interest of the company. So there are two parameters: one, who has the control over the company, and the other one is who owns the ownership interest in the company or shares in the company. So the examples of ownership are, if you are a single member LLC, then naturally the person who owns 100% ownership interest of the company will be considered a beneficial owner. If you are a multi-member LLC and you have there are two co-owners and each owns 50%, then both of them can be treated as beneficial owner. Another example, LLCs, multi-member LLCs that have four members and each of them own 25%, then all four of them will be considered beneficial owners as per the CTA. So their informations will have to be disclosed. So these are the examples of beneficial ownership through um, ownership of interest in the company. And now we will look at substantial control. So, like I said, quick recap, beneficial owners are the ones that have substantial control over the company or the ones who own 25% or more interest in the company. So we've talked about the ownership interest. We are looking at substantial control. So the substantial control requirement is that these are the individuals who exercise control over the company. So it can be company's senior officer. These are the people who have the authority to appoint or remove any senior officer from the board of directors of the company. These are the people who actually determine when we are going to sell the assets of the company, reorganizing the company, authority to dissolve the company or merge the business with another merge, issue equity on behalf of the company, take on large debt on behalf of the company, or change and alter business lines and ventures about the company. So this is a definition. So it's not saying that a person who is, for example, a manager, they are automatically beneficial owners. They're looking at what type of influence those people have in the company. And we look at, for example, sorry, some examples of substantial control can be president of the company, chief executive officer, chief operating officer, or, for example, it's a single member LLC, but you have a manager, you've appointed another person as the manager who runs, all the operations in the company. So that manager can be treated as having substantial control. I think somebody raised hand or sent a question.
Someone had their hand raised, but lowered it. I'm checking through the chat for all questions.
Yeah.
If you have a moment, there is one question.
Mhm.
A person asked, if I am 100% of the company, am I exempt?
No, you're not exempt. In fact, you are, it makes things easier for you to report. So if you own 100% of the company, that means you are the beneficial owner of the company because we're looking at 25% or more, right?
Uh,
So if we go back to the definition, it's who owns or control at least 25% of the ownership interest of the company. So if you have 100%, then you are going to be the beneficial owner. And yeah, I mean, it is subjective, and that is why the tricky part is this. The tricky part is realizing and figuring out who the beneficial owner is, who has substantial control over the company. The form is the form is more straightforward. It's the journey to actually completing the form and knowing whose information we have to fill out. That's where we have to get into all of these details. And you're absolutely right that this is, I mean, I wouldn't call it subjective, but it's not abundantly clear. It's not, everything is not spelled out. That's why we need to go into detail. And the more complex a company structure is, the compliance gets complex. But if you are a single member LLC, don't have any other, sort of executive employees in the company, then it's more straightforward. Or if you are a small company with, one or two executive level employees, you are the 100% owner, or you have one other partner, then compliance requirements are simpler.
we have a couple more questions if you're able to take it.
Sure.
A person asked, what if you started a company by registering it with the Secretary of State, but have not done anything with the business as of yet, zero sales or anything?
You still have to, you will still have to file the report.
Okay.
Yeah.
Someone asked, do attribution rules apply?
So I'm not sure what the question would be.
Yeah, I'm not too sure.
Attribution rules, I'm not sure.
Yeah, Joel, could you expand upon that question? Another person asked, a woman-owned business registered as a sole proprietor is exempt from registering Ben owners? Question mark.
So, like we discussed before, sole props are not included in the reporting company definition, because sole prop, by its definition, if you have not had to file a registration with the Secretary of State, then the requirement to file beneficial ownership report does not exist. So that doesn't apply to sole props.
Perfect. Couple more questions. Even if the registered business name 10 to 12 years ago and have done nothing with the business, I had to register. The answer would probably still be yes.
Yeah, because we looked at the inactive business requirement. So I would say no, it depends, right? So if you were registered prior to 2020, you haven't had any activities, that exemption applies. So there is an exemption for those entities that were registered before 2020 but have been inactive. They haven't had any sales, they haven't had any transfer of funds or receipts, then they are the ones that have the exemption. And we will share resources. We have shared resources and links at the end. So you can look at like your specific situation. FinCEN has done a good job of coming up with FAQs and explanations. And, we are clarifying everything as much as we can in this presentation. So you can look at your specific business structure and see where that actually fits into the requirement. But our goal here is to cover as much of, as the field as possible for small businesses, because most of the small businesses that we see are the ones, that are single member LLCs. Pretty much all single member LLCs will have to file a report. LLCs that have, 2 or more members, yes, in that case, you own more than 25% of the company, then all of those members will have to file the report. All right.
Perfect.
Moving along. So there are some of these beneficial owners that are exempt. So as somebody asked, if I am 100% owner of the company, I'm exempt. You're not exempt because I'm assuming you're not a minor child. The exemption is for in case there's a minor child who has inheritance rights, then they are exempt. You don't have to report their requirement. If there are certain employees of the company that have very specific duties, they're not necessarily senior officers, then their information don't have to be reported. So, for example, an assistant manager who really just takes, instructions from the senior manager or the president of the company, they won't necessarily be considered beneficial owners of the company. All right. So we were looking at under the beneficial ownership report. There are three main components that we were talking about. One is the reporting company that we discussed. So the reporting company that has to, who is a reporting company and how we make sure that, who needs to comply with that. The second part, we looked at who's a beneficial owner of the company, whose information we actually have to provide. The third component of the report is company applicant. So they are also requiring that any company that is registered after January 1st, 2024, the person who actually files the application of the company, their information should also be included in the beneficial ownership report. So who is this person? When you register an LLC with the Secretary of State, what you're required to do is there is a form on the Secretary of State's website. You go pull out that form, fill out all the information, and then at the end, it asks you authorized signatory. So it's the person who actually signs that form, that those articles of incorporation and articles of formation. Those are the people who are generally considered company applicant, and their information will also have to be included in the beneficial ownership report. So in summary, these are the three components of the report that we have addressed. Any questions that have come up?
There's been a couple more questions.
Okay. I think we can address them.
Okay. If a company reported just to be safe, but might have otherwise been considered exempt, is the company now obligated to continue reporting?
So the reporting requirement is really one time. The reporting requirement it's not an ongoing requirement. It's a one-time reporting requirement. It's only in case when the companies have changes in the information, that's when you have to update the report. Otherwise, it's more of a one and done deal. So you do the filing one time, you report who the beneficial owners are, what the company's information is, and then you're done with it, unless there is actually a change. But like the question that you posed was that, what if I am not otherwise exempt? The thing is that FinCEN is not really going to give you an opinion that you are exempt and you filed it by mistake. They're going to take the information and they're going to keep it with them. That's why we are doing this outreach and as much explanation as possible, because it is that test where we have to determine and make sure that if we are required to comply, then we make sure to file that report.
Thank you. The person expanded upon the attribution rule question. They were saying if the husband owns 10% and wife owns 15%, are both considered to own 25% of company?
So we have not seen any clarification with respect to this. It's basically they're focused on individual. They're not really focused on, what the joint ownership of the company is. So it's going to be, it depends, if the husband owns 10% and the wife owns 15%, they're not qualifying under the 25% requirement. But do they exercise any control over the company is what we have to look at. So with that 10%, do you have the right to vote and maybe veto appointment of the board of directors? Do you have the right to veto or like have a decision making authority on behalf of the company when the company decides to acquire new businesses or obtain loan on behalf of the business? So now in that case, you will have to look at what type of authorities and control you have on behalf of the company. So we are not looking at you and your wife together. We are looking at each of you and what type of control you are going to be exercising over the company.
Perfect. Thank you. There's another question. What about a sole proprietor that has a fictitious name or similar registered with the Secretary of State?
Yeah, those are exempt. So you may need to register. It's just a name that you have registered, but when you register the name, then you do put your name, right, as the person who has obtained that trade name registration. So if we look at the intent behind this act and this reporting requirement, they're trying to reach the individual owners who are generally behind that LLC structure. Because in Ohio, if you want to file an LLC, all you have to do is come up with the name of the LLC, file a form. You don't have to put information about who owns the LLC, right? So that's the information that they're trying to get to, who actually owns this LLC. But in case of sole proprietorship, there's no, it's not opaque. It's pretty transparent who's running the business, who's the person who actually registered the trade name. So there is no mystery behind it. They're not, the FinCEN will not be wondering who is the person who ultimately owns this business. It's pretty clear from the trade name.
Perfect. A person asked, will you be sharing this where to go for the filing? Yes, I will include that in the follow-up post meeting.
Yeah, and then we will share the link, and I'll if we have time, we can do a quick tour of the report that we have to complete.
Perfect. Thank you. A person asked, I recently changed my LLC to a sole proprietor. Am I exempt even though I was previously registered as an LLC?
So you have changed your LLC does that mean you have canceled your LLC registration? So if an LLC registration, in case of conversion, means that you had an LLC, you dissolved that LLC, and now you're running your business as a sole prop. So if that LLC has been dissolved, then there is no compliance requirement.
Perfect. A person asked, when it says only applies to companies registered after January 1, 2024, does that mean registered as a company in general? So if I register my LLC in September 2023, do I have to comply and file the report?
Yeah, so this requirement that I put here only applies to companies registered after January 1, 2024. It is only with respect to company applicant. So all the other information will apply to you. So if you registered in September 2023, you will have to go back and you will still have to file information about the beneficial owner. You will still have to file the information about your reporting company. So I'm just going back in the slide. So reporting company, any company that exists, pretty much, not any, but pretty much, most not any, but pretty much